Welcome back to another episode of Light Beer, Dark Money. I'm Sean Noble.
And I'm Chris Clements.
And we are welcoming today our good friend Bob Logan. Chris, tell us a little bit.
Yeah,
about
Bob and I have known
Bob
each other now for, 20 years maybe?
If
a
that,
long time.
maybe more.
And
Yeah.
Bob's got a new book out that's really, really interesting. He's going to be telling us about called Let Your Path Find You. And he's kind of launched that book and begun a whole new career in speaking and writing and motivational topics. But how we knew each other was from the University of Arizona.
That's right.
When you were an associate athletic director
That's
there.
right.
In charge of the Wildcat Club for
Exactly
years
right.
and years and years.
During the glory days, as they say.
During the glory days. During the glory days when you... every little thing I went to, there was Bob.
That's right.
And
That's
then,
right.
And then you were there for about 10 years?
10 years in athletics, and then, I was recruited to the College of Science.
Yeah,
all places.
I was reading that, and I had forgotten about that. There was,
it's a funny story. Can I tell the story?
No,
Absolutely.
please. Like I said,
it's-
we're pretty free flowing here. So
I was an associate
bounce around.
athletic director, and like everybody, I was in the senior management. We had about 10 ADs, associate ADs, and such, but we were all the same age, And I had aspirations to replace Jim Livengood, the athletic director at the time. But the way to do that is you have to move away, go to a different school, do a great job, go to another school, do a great job, and hopefully you get hired back. Well, I was in 12 schools.
That's what Mark Harland is doing
Exactly.
right now.
Well, I
He's
know.
hoping to be hired back.
Chris Delcani, too.
Yeah.
They figured it out. And
I think Chris is where he's not going to be leaving anytime soon.
He's doing
at
okay.
Texas.
He's doing okay. So I thought I didn't want to do that because I moved around the country as an Air Force brat. I didn't want to have my kids go to a bunch of schools. So I love Tucson. And I was paid okay. I was happy in Tucson. And the science thing came along, and I went, my degree's in history. All right? And I'm just supposed to raise money. It took about 3 or 4 months before I said, okay, I'm going to go do this. Because I thought if I can, excuse my French, kick ass in the College of Science, there'll be a lot of people who go, wow, I didn't think he'd do okay. I mean, I thought that would be a good story to tell if I was ever going to interview for the U of A AD job. So that's how I ended up with there. 20 years in the College of Science, believe it or not.
Wow. Yeah. And you raised a lot of money for them.
A lot of money. Missions to Mars, $20 million for a mirror lab for the biggest mirror. I mean, what I found is, as much as I love sports, when you get into the world of science, you find out there's a lot of people walking around that don't care about sports.
Yeah.
Our faculty,
shocking, right?
I'm telling you.
Wait, who are those people?
I had faculty that wouldn't know not only that we had a game on Saturday, but who we played on Saturday and whether we won or lost. They had no idea.
Yeah.
And so it was a totally different world. But, curing cancer and going to Mars, I realized, boy, it's a pretty big mission.
Yeah.
I mean, really, it changed my whole attitude about athletics.
Yeah, I would imagine it was pretty humbling pretty quickly.
It was very, very humbling.
It puts athletics kind of in perspective.
Yeah, and U of A has been a trendsetter in the sciences.
Oh, very big.
That kind of
Yeah.
thing. So you were definitely in the right place.
Right place at the right time to raise a lot of money and have a big impact. I mean, one story that I'll tell you when I first got there was speech, language, and hearing sciences is one of our departments. And we had a donor that was funding basically scholarship program for these kids that were getting cochlear implants. So they were deaf.
Yeah.
And they were getting these cochlear implants, and insurance only paid for a certain number of weeks. And they extended this for like 6 months. So we're in a room with the glass, the see-through glass or non-see-through glass, and these kids are doing their therapy. And they're learning how to speak and hear for the first time. And at the end, they come out to meet the donors, and they have these signs that said, "Thank you for helping me hear for the first time." I mean, it's like everybody is crying. I mean, it was so grounding for me to really see the impact of philanthropy.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, and I think you really took over there at a time when the Biosphere was sort of in limbo.
It was kind of a joke.
It was kind of a joke. It was. I mean, they made a movie about it, right?
Oh yeah. Pauly Shore.
Yeah,
I hear it all the
Pauly
time. I hear it all the time.
But now it's not.
It's not. And that's an interesting story too. So the Biosphere at that time was pretty much fallow. I mean, there was some visit, but there was nothing going on there.
Didn't
There was
Columbia University own
Yeah,
it for a
and
time?
guess who was running?
I'm remembering this correctly.
Guess who was running the Biosphere from Columbia at the time? Michael Crow,
Interesting.
the president at ASU.
It was a plot.
Well, and here's what happened. They were considering just bulldozing the Biosphere and building homes because there was no purpose for it. It was a big deal. And Ed Bass and his team came to the university and said, we'd like to hear what the University of Arizona might do if we provide the Biosphere for you. And my dean, Joaquin Ruiz, a rock star, he said, look, we'll put something together, but I'm going to tell you up front, we have zero resources. So this is going to be, we'll come up with a plan and a program, but you're funding the whole thing. And they went to ASU and Michael Crow. Michael is at ASU now by this point and did the same thing. And ASU came back with like a 700-page proposal. And the Biosphere has these different biomes, a desert and a savanna and a agriculture bay. And ASU had something planned for every one of these biomes. Joaquin brought all these scientists into a room. And we were on the board. It was fascinating. They were on the board talking about what they could do. And they said, we want to do something that can't be done anywhere else in the world. And so what they did is they said, we're going to create a hill slope in the agricultural bay, and we're going to study water. Because what people don't know is when it rains, you can't measure what happens to that water. Some of it goes into the soil, some of it evaporates. And the Biosphere bridges the gap between studying things in a micro laboratory setting versus going out and counting trees that are dying in the forest. The Biosphere bridges that gap. And that was what we proposed. And they said yes. And we had the Biosphere, and we've had it for, I think, about 10 years now.
Yeah.
Wow. There's got to be multiple books that could be written about the Biosphere. I mean, the fact that Steve Bannon was involved.
Oh,
with
I
the
know.
Biosphere
I
at
know.
one point.
I know some Steve Bannon stories. I'm not going to go there on this podcast, though.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, we're not talking about too much politics today.
Well,
Right.
So let's step back in your career, back to when your athletic days,
Right.
and go right to where I know Chris wants to go. So I'll bring us there.
I was going to go there later, but if you want to go there
Let's
now,
do it now. Let's get it out of the way.
Get it out of the way.
Yeah. Because we've got some really important stuff for Bob to talk about with his book.
Yeah.
But let's get the conference stuff.
Let's get the hot topic out of the way.
So as a kid growing up in Arizona, my dad was a U of A guy. I was, not really into anything other than just watching college sports.
Right.
But I was a big baseball kid. I was a huge Dodgers fan. So I happened to like ASU baseball.
Okay.
And so you had Reggie Jackson and
Bobby
Barry Bonds
Winkle's
and
great baseball.
And so, then the Pac-10 was churning out some pretty great talent. So there's some things to be proud of from a Pac-10, Pac-12 standpoint. But it's what's happening.
Oh.
What's happened, I guess.
It's been an eventful week.
How long is this podcast?
We'll take whatever we need.
It's been an eventful, I would say, 2 years.
Let me put it this way. I'm really glad I was in science, for the last 20 years. It's crazy. Greg Hansen, the columnist in Tucson, just had a column. I brought it up here actually today. And he talked about Arizona entering the Pac-10 in 1978. Okay? And his story is about we played Oregon State in the first Pac-10 game. That Saturday, all right, that Saturday of that September football game, there was one football game on national TV the entire day.
Wow.
To now, there are probably 10, 15 games being played concurrently in all these different channels. And what's really, it's clear what's happened. What's sad about the state of college athletics is a couple of things. Athletic directors and presidents and chancellors do not control their own enterprise anymore. The media do.
Yeah.
The media and Fox moved USC and UCLA in the Los Angeles media market to the Big Ten. Presidents didn't do it. The ADs didn't do it. I mean, the media did that. They're getting $90 million a year.
Yeah.
And Pac-12 teams are getting, or 30.
Right.
30. They're getting $60 million more in the Big 12, Big 10. Big 12 is $30 million. And Apple comes up with a plan for $20 million, and you have to get them in subscribers. It was a non-starter.
Non-starter.
Yeah.
It's sad. And then the money for student athletes and NIL. I'm in favor of players being paid. And do you remember Jay John? Do you know Jay John by chance? Okay, Jay John was best man in my wedding. He was a head coach at Oregon State, head basketball coach. And I was talking to him on the way up to Phoenix, and we were talking about NIL. And he says, this is a great story. I was the head coach, and my kids were playing the PlayStation. And all of the players on Oregon State were there with their names, and Jay had a likeness, and Jay gets a check in the mail for $10,000. And he calls his agent and says, "What's this $10,000 for?" He says, "Well, that's your royalty for being on the PlayStation." "Well, do the players get anything?" "No." And at that time, he said, "There's going to be a day this can be a problem."
Yeah.
And
And ironically enough, EA Sports College Football 2024 has been announced. It'll be being released next year.
right.
And all those players will get paid.
Absolutely. And the NCAA, with the Ed O'Bannon lawsuit with the UCLA, if they had only allowed the players to get paid for their jerseys and their name on the back and their video games, all of this that we're seeing today would not have happened.
Yeah.
And so, and you can't put the genie back in
Right.
the bottle, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, and there's another argument to be made that if former Pac-12 commissioner Larry Scott had actually been more aggressive in getting teams from the Big 12 to come over to the Pac-12 at that time,
Right.
none of this would have happened.
Well,
Somebody said on social media the other day, USC and UCLA fired the first shot in the demise of the Pac-12. I'm like, well, Larry Scott loaded the gun.
right.
Larry
there was a
Scott
year-
loaded the gun, and the narrative on the USC side, just to be very biased on this.
Because you're a USC guy,
Yeah, I
too.
am. And the narrative there is not one university president, when USC was under fire, stood up for USC. Not one AD stood up for USC. They stripped Reggie Bush of his Heisman. Nobody said a word.
Right.
So why wouldn't USC leave?
Well, they're the power,
Yeah.
And there was a day, and I don't know if it was Larry Scott, but we had an opportunity to get Texas and Oklahoma
Absolutely.
in the Pac-10.
Absolutely.
And here's something else. So I come from an academic world now in the College of Science, so I lived that world too. And I think some of the reason the Pac-12 has the problems they have is I'm going to use the word snobbishness, that's probably too strong, but the presidents of the Pac-12 institutions who only want to hang with academic research one schools. So Arizona and Arizona State and Washington and UCLA and USC are research one academic schools. Texas Tech is not. Oklahoma is not.
Right.
So they made some decisions to say no based on the academic standards that they wanted to uphold. And here we are.
Yeah.
Well, and ironically enough, I mean, USC, UCLA going to the Big Ten, those academic standards are pretty consistent throughout there.
Yeah.
And so now, the question becomes, what does Cal and Stanford do? Well, from an academic standpoint, they would be welcomed into the
Absolutely.
Big, and I think that's going to happen.
Well, Jay wasn't sure. The ACC
It
was
would make
voting.
sense.
ACC was voting today
Right.
for Cal and Stanford to go into ACC.
Yeah.
I don't know the result of the vote yet.
Yeah. You can see the Pacific Ocean. Welcome to the Atlantic ACC.
Well, here's the crazy thing about Stanford. There's a thing called the Director's Cup, and that is a ranking of universities and where they finish in every sport that the schools offer, from golf and tennis to lacrosse to football and basketball, all of them. Stanford has won 22 out of the past 26 Director's Cup.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
They're the best athletic program in the country.
Yeah.
And they're sitting on the sidelines without a conference now.
That's amazing.
So
I'd heard somebody say, well, Cal and Stanford should just go into the Ivy League conference, whatever that is. But and Stanford's and Cal to some degree are way beyond where those schools are,
Right.
from an athletic standpoint.
Actually, ACC is not a bad fit. You've got Duke, you've got North Carolina with the Research Triangle. So academically, there's some compelling reasons why the ACC, outside of travel,
Right, just
And
outside
here's-
of geography.
here's my prediction. I think when the non-revenue sports or the Olympic sports begin to travel across the country and try to get back to California,
Yeah.
and they're having horrific travel things happen to them, I think the student athletes at some point, I'm not going to say unionize, but it's unfair to these kids to have to travel across the country to play a tennis match.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And nobody's talking about that. Because
That's a great point.
It doesn't matter. It's all about the money. It's not about the kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, certainly that's especially the case for the ACC and the Big Ten. Not so much for the Big 12, though. Arizona and Arizona
no.
State and Utah and Colorado joining, that makes a lot of sense.
And I think,
And I think it's going to be a really good conference for them.
I think it's going to be fantastic. I hope we don't have to go to Central Florida, although Orlando, Disney World, I guess
Right.
that could be a cool
Yeah,
thing.
I mean, there's some tweaks in there, obviously,
Right.
but at the end of the day, most of it's Texas,
Yeah,
Oklahoma.
and it's going to be better for us basketball. It's a much better
Absolutely.
basketball conference. And so I have no qualms about going to the Big 12. I think it's going to be fun to go to Waco.
Well, and Crow tweeted something about, it was a picture of him doing the javelin or something, because I guess he at Iowa he was in the athletic.
Yeah.
And so he's like, well, I'm going back home.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you're right. It is sad in terms of the traditions and loss of rivalries and all that. But
Right.
but the writing had been on the wall for some time. And
It was.
and
It has been.
actually, before we started recording, you made another prediction, and that was the conferences are just going to go away at some point.
I think, look, what does conference affiliation do anymore outside of the five Power Five that have the number of teams to go to the football playoff? But beyond that, they serve no purpose.
The Power Four and the Pop Warner.
That's a
Four.
really good point.
I think we're going to end up with the top 60 football schools in the country, and everybody else is going to have to fend for themselves after that. How they distribute the money, I don't know, but it's clear we're moving in that direction. So
Yeah.
it's and not like the old days. I'm sounding like an old person now, the good old days.
Good old days.
No, but I mean, once you open Pandora's box, I mean, be careful what you wish for,
Yeah,
right?
exactly
I mean, the
right.
NIL immediately, even you have Nick Saban complaining about the NIL, which which is kind of a joke because NIL or no NIL, he pretty much gets whoever he wants.
Well, and here's the other part. I've heard the number in the neighborhood of 90 to 95% of all NIL money are going to football and basketball players. So it's the rich are getting richer, and the non-revenue sports are not getting much of that.
Yeah, they're trying to promote. Like I've received some emails and some texts from the big NIL group for USC, and they're trying to promote the fact that other students are getting NIL money, but it's not even of the same scale.
Well,
Right.
it's
not even close.
But at the same time,
And rightfully so. I mean, it is a numbers game.
yeah,
And it is a revenue game.
it is where the audience is. Now, so it's either you're in a big sport or you're hot.
Yeah.
Right? You had those twins that play basketball. They're not all that great, but they've got huge followings on social media. I can't remember their names, but they're making a lot of money.
Yeah.
But they're actually quitting playing basketball because they're making so much on their sponsorships now. They just parlayed that.
Yeah.
Well, that's fine. It's the world we live in. My niece swims at NC State, and she's crushing it. And she's got little deals here and there with like Liquid IV and a couple other sponsorships. So something that would never have happened for her, but for this. So I don't know how much it is. It's not very much, but it's something.
It's something.
So
It was interesting. I'm in a breakfast group in Tucson, and it's business leaders, and we have a speaker. We meet once every 2 weeks, and Jed Fish, the football coach, came to.
Who is doing a tremendous job, by the way.
I think this year could be really a fun year.
The recruiting rankings for the Big 12 for 2024 came out the other day. Arizona's on top.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So he's talking about
Above TCU and
that's
everybody
amazing.
else.
He's talking about NIL and transfer portal and all the things happening, and he talks for about 20 minutes. And so I raised my hand at the end. I said, Coach Fish, that was fascinating. I really appreciate your comments. And just for some background, I spent 10 years as an associate athletic director. And what's interesting is pretty much all the comments that you made in the last 20 minutes were all NCAA violations back in the day. He says
Exactly.
it's a wild, wild west, man.
It's a whole new world.
Which is all the more reason why they need to give Reggie Bush his trophy back.
Yeah.
It's a joke.
This is a problem for you, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a problem for all USC fans
This is the
because
hill
of the way
that
it was
Chris
handled.
will die on. Right?
Oh, we will all die on this one. It's moving in that direction. We'll see what happens.
Bob, tell us about
Yeah.
your book. How did you get to the point where you become an author?
Let's get to why we're really here.
Oh,
because
I know.
We can
I
digress
can
all
talk
day.
sports all day long. Screw the book, right? I retired 2 years ago from the university from a 33-year career, and it's been a wild ride from coaching football. I was a head coach of a team in Bologna, Italy, of all places, and raising millions of dollars.
Actual football, not soccer.
Actual football.
So-
and they didn't speak English either,
So
by
kind
the
of
way.
a Ted Lasso thing. sort of.
Exactly. And so I retired, and I obviously I'm not afraid of a microphone, so I like speaking, and I used to MC all these events at the
Yeah.
U of A, the loot lunches and stuff, and I used to love doing that.
You and Dave Sitton.
Exactly. And people come up to me and say, "Hey, Bobby, that was great, man. Have you ever thought about speaking?" And I was still working at the time. I said, "Hey, I appreciate the comments, but I've got a real job. I'm sorry, I'm not going there." Well, when I retired, I said, "You know what? I think I'm going to try this. Build a website." And it's been about a 5 or 6 year run because I started speaking near the end of my U of A career. And I go to a conference in Puerto Rico. It's called Campus Speak, and it's a conference for speakers in the university sector, which is perfect for me. And this guy gets up on the stage, and it's kind of a snake oil salesman kind of guy,
Right.
selling his package. And he's standing there and he's talking about, if you're going to be a legitimate speaker, you got to have a book. And I'm looking at him, I'm like, I don't even have my website built. Are you out of your
tell me to do a
mind?
book?
and so he keeps going on, and he identifies a couple people in the audience that have used him. And one of them is sitting right next to me. And I pull her aside and I said, "Come on, is the guy legit?" And he says, "Yeah." So I did. I gave him a couple $1,000s, and he gave me the template on how to do it. And I've done this pretty much. This is a 6-year project for me. And if you go to conferences and the speakers are selling their books in the back of the room, I'm not saying all of them, but many of them are just kind of thrown together so they can have a book.
Yeah.
Right.
My book is much different than that. And my book is a nonfiction, self-improvement book. And the chapters pretty much, it tells my story, my life through stories, but the chapters all live on their own. So to give you an example, the chapter titles are things like fear, failure, challenge, change, adversity, leadership, work-life balance, laughter, happiness. So you can go anywhere in the book and read 20 pages, and at the end, I've got takeaways about fear. Here's some 10 takeaways on fear. And what's fun about it is I've had more than a handful of people, because I'll tell you what, just like my website, I was afraid to show people my website because I didn't know if it was any good. We all have that are we good enough syndrome. Same thing with the book. My wife did not read my book until I got it published because I didn't show anybody. I didn't know if it was any good. And when you have people come up and say, "Man, this is fantastic," and I'm not patting myself on the back, but when other people say it, it's pretty gratifying.
Yeah.
And it's got, my parents died young. My only brother died young. So I don't have any family, immediate family. And so this was also partly to have my 2 sons know a little bit more about their dad.
That's great.
So and then the final thing is the Camino de Santiago, which is, do you know the Camino? No? Do you know the Camino?
No, I don't.
The Camino is a 500-mile pilgrimage across northern Spain. And it's been walked for about 2,000 years. You start in France, you cross the Pyrenees Mountains, and you walk to Santiago de Compostela. And in the cathedral are the remains of St. James, one of Jesus' apostles. And people do this pilgrim. About 250,000 people walk this Camino every year.
Wow.
And I've walked the Camino 3 times. And a life-changing experience. So there are many Camino stories in the book, too. And then finally, and I'll stop talking here, but I've got QR codes in there. So I tell a story, and there might be a video or a story in there, and you can take your phone and take a picture of the QR code, and it takes you to a video that expands the story. So it's a
Very
fully
cool.
immersive book.
Oh, that's great.
I'm done selling, okay?
No, it's fine.
I love it. So what was the process? I mean, did you sit down and, because I want to write I have a bunch of book ideas, but my big hang up has been just figuring out, and everyone says you just got to do it. Just got to start. Did you have a process? Did you set aside time? Did you just do it when you felt like it? What was the...
Well, people have come up to me now and they go, "Hey, are you going to do another book?" Well, it took me 6 years to do this one. Yes, I am, and it's going to be called How to Write a Book. So it took a while to. I didn't want a narrative. I didn't want this to read like a novel, because what I found is most people don't read the books.
Yeah.
They read 50 pages, and life gets in the way, and you go on your phone, and trying to get people's attention for 250 pages is pretty hard in today's environment. So I really wanted to have, narratives that are short. You want to hear about fear or failure. Let's talk about failure. And I've got stories of, quitting the Air Force Academy. And I've got stories of missions to Mars that failed, over, $20 devices that failed. So I really wanted to find things that everybody in our lives have issues with. We're all scared of something. We're all, afraid to fail. We're all looking for happiness. We all are looking for leadership opportunities. How do we become better? So I just kind of penciled it out and then started doing a ton of research. And then I would weave in stories from my life that matched that chapter title. But I'm not a great writer. In terms of sitting down and spending 10 hours writing, it was a lot of short little stints. And I encourage you to do it, because the day that this thing showed up in the mail, one of the best days of my life.
Got to be gratifying.
Oh, you have no idea. Yeah. So it's really gratifying. And it's not about selling a bunch of books. It's about taking a challenge and completing a process and succeeding, which we all want to do.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Good
And
for
let
you.
you parlay this into a pretty good speaking gig. The book is sort of incidental, like you said. And how's that been going?
That's been, that guy on the stage that said, if you're going to be a speaker, you have to have a book.
Yeah.
He was absolutely correct. I mean, just having a book.
Yeah, I would imagine that's the biggest question that you would normally get if you're up on stage.
It just raises your profile.
Yeah.
It makes you, I hate to say it makes you legitimate.
It validates you.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. When I was in the College of Science for 20 years, my title was Senior Director of Development. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that was the highest title you could get on the campus, no matter where you worked. They didn't have VPs or anything like that. And that was my title, no big deal, all right? Well, I had an opportunity to get another job, and so I had a retention situation. And I told my dean, I said, I want to be an associate dean. I want to change my title to associate dean for external relations. And it was a little bit complicated, but I was able to get that title. When I became an associate dean and I started making phone calls to get appointments, it blew my mind at how I was viewed. I'm the same guy.
Right.
My card is a little bit different. I've not lost any weight, but I would get meetings all the time just by virtue of the stature of being a dean.
Yeah.
When I said I'm associate dean, people go, "Oh, wow." They thought I was smart,
That's hilarious.
Well,
That's so
Chris,
true.
I'm now the associate dean of Light Beer Dark Money.
There we go.
Just so you know.
I am the producer of Light Beer. Yeah.
Well, you might have to fight
executive-
Robin for that, but
Executive creator.
executive creator.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm the
How did-
something.
Yeah. Where did the title of the book come from?
Well, the cover of the book is actually a photograph that I took on the Camino. And when you learn about books, most of the time you do not have photographs on them. If you look at books, very few photographs. And many of them are graphically designed for lots of various artistic reasons. But this photo I actually loved, and there's a story behind the photo too. And as I showed it to more people, without telling them that it was my photograph, I had many people say, "Man, that's just an awesome image." And so I said, "Okay, I'm going to run with that." So the title is The Camino is a 500-mile path,
Yeah.
which was a groundbreaking and life-changing experience for me. It gave me a totally different perspective of life. So it became, let people find their path. I mean, we're all searching for the right way in life, right? Whether it's through your faith, through where you work, or through your family, we're trying to find that path. So that's where it kind of originated from.
Yeah.
That's great.
And how has your faith influenced this journey?
So I'm a Catholic. Like a lot of Catholics, kind of fell back from the church and stopped going to mass as much as we should. And I hadn't been the best Catholic in the world when I went on the Camino. I was a good person, I wasn't a total sinner,
Yeah.
Right.
But when you go to that cathedral in Santiago, I'll never forget this. In our old days, it's called confession. I guess it's called reconciliation now. But going into the confessional booth with the screen with the priest on the other side.
You have a new Catholic right
That's
here.
right. There we go.
Coming.
And I walked into the church, and you have this incredible feeling of satisfaction, and the church is incredible looking. Okay, but all down one aisle of this church, and the church is in the form of a cross, okay, are confessional booths in different languages. So there are 15 priests, English, French, Spanish, Lithuanian, whatever. And boy, I kneeled down for the first time to do a confession in probably 5 or 10 years with a priest that was 6 inches from my face, and it blew my mind. It was incredible.
That's amazing.
I took my wife 10 years later on the Camino for our 40th anniversary, and we are in a church in a small, little, tiny town, and they have a mass usually for the pilgrims that are walking the Camino. And at the end of this mass, and this was an old, 1,000-year-old church, the priest said, I'm going to do some confession on the side if anybody's wanting to stick around. And I, looked at my wife, and she hadn't had a confession in a long time. She goes, I'm going to do this. So, I kind of tear up when I think about it, but yeah, it just changed my whole outlook on, it's not about my faith or my God. I mean, everybody's God is fine, but it changed my perspective on living a better life.
Well, that's really what it's about. I mean, it's about living a better life, living your best life, and adhering to the better angels, so to
Right.
speak. And I think that's an amazing story. I think that it's definitely something I want to do now that you're talking about it, for sure. How long does that take?
So if you do the full 500 miles, it's about 6 weeks. And I know people listening are going, no way can I take 6 weeks. So you don't have to do the entire 500 miles.
Right.
All right. I have a friend in Tucson that was a CEO of TMC, Tucson Medical Center Foundation, Mike Duran. I don't know if you know Mike Duran.
No.
And he wanted to do the Camino, and we had talked about it, and he couldn't take 6 weeks off. So for the next 6 years, he took a week off, flew to Spain with his wife, walked a week, and then came home. And then next year, he went back to where he ended, walked another week. So he did the entire Camino over 6 weeks. Many people will walk just the final 100 miles. And they have a thing called the Compostela. It's a certificate of completion that they give you in Santiago. So there's a lot of people that show up and walk this final 100 miles. And so to do the whole thing, it's about 6 weeks.
Wow.
I was on it 3 weeks for the first time, about 3.5 weeks on the second time, and about 4 weeks on the third time. But and I'll tell you, the people that say that they can't do it, no, they just choose to not do it.
Yeah.
If you want to do something, you make this happen. And I will tell you, when I went in 2012, not many people had heard of the Camino. You Google it, there wasn't much out there. And when I told people, hey, I'm going to walk in Spain for a month, and wow, your job must not be that hard. What, everything okay with you? I had people, so I stopped telling people because I was always getting, and I write about it in the book, I was getting criticized because I had made a choice to do something powerful, but because it wasn't in the norm, It wasn't accepted.
Right.
you
Which
know?
is all the more reason to do it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm sure that was motivation.
There's a movie. If you're gonna, if you
Especially
guys,
if God's calling you in that way, right? I mean, it's
Oh.
if you feel in your heart and your soul that this is something God wants you to do because He wants you to experience something of Him, which obviously is what happened to you.
Yeah, I've been proselytizing about the Camino for the last 12 years because of the experience. So, you know, every little town has a pilgrim's mass at 7 p.m. and a lot of the locals show up, and the mass is in Spanish, and then they bring all the pilgrims up for the front of the church for a blessing, to bless the pilgrims, and it's just really powerful. It really is. So, homework for you too, since you don't know about the Camino. Martin Sheen is a star of a movie called The Way, and it's on Netflix. Emilio Estevez, his son, is a director. It was done in about probably 2010. They are from the Basque Country of northern Spain.
Yeah.
And unemployment in northern Spain was like 28 or 30%. They filmed this movie on the Camino to promote people to come to Spain and walk the Camino.
Wow.
And you would talk to people on the Camino and say, hey, how come you're here? Many of them said, oh, I saw this movie. So watch the movie and you'll be in Spain by the end of the month.
Okay, we'll do it. We'll do it. Bob, thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
I hope I didn't talk too much.
No, this is great. It's great reconnecting
fantastic.
with you.
I'm anxious to read your book. I just bought it.
Good.
And while we've been sitting here, and I mean, we just appreciate your wisdom and insight. And we'll probably have to have you back.
Yeah.
Especially after I go walk the Camino.
There you go. We can give Caber notes.
Might have to make it a light beer, dark money trek.
Right.
But yeah, Bob, thanks so much for what you're doing and inspiring a lot of new folks to understand their path in life.
You know,
So
I appreciate it.
They can get the book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold, right?
Yep. So it's on Barnes & Noble online. It's on Amazon, easy to get on Amazon. And if you want to go to my landing page, it's letyourpathfindyou, the name of the book.com.
Great.
And you've got clicks there. It's got lots of stories about me and the Camino. And you can click to Amazon from there if you choose.
Great.
Okay?
Great.
Awesome.
Well,
Thank you.
thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right,
Appreciate
God
it.
bless.
Yeah.